Okay, boys and girls. Hello, this is Mrs. D with Storytime with Mrs. D once again. I had to do a re-record because I had said something wrong. I said artist instead of author in my intro. So here goes again for my re-recording of Ron's Big Mission. The author is Rose Blue and Corrine Naden, and it's illustrated by Don Tate. And as we all know, children, the author is the one who writes the story. The illustrator is the one who draws or paints the pictures for the author. So I hope that you enjoy this story about Ron's Big Mission. All right, let's get into it and see what Ron's Big Mission is all about. You're up early this morning, Ron. What's the rush? Said Mrs. McNair. Come and have your breakfast. I made some oatmeal. I have to go, Mama, said Ron, tying his sneakers. I have something to do this morning. You always have something to do, said his mother with a smile. Just be home by lunchtime, okay? Ron was 9 years old. That morning he left his house with a plan. He'd been thinking about it for a long time. It was a beautiful South Carolina summer day, and Ron looked up at the blue sky. Someday, he thought, he would be up there, flying a plane. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up, but today Ron had something else on his mind, something very important. Ron walked down the street as fast as he could. He didn't want to be late. Hi, Ron, the grocer called from the front of his store. There you are, just in time for a donut. Morning, Mr. Douglas, said Ron. Thank you, but there's someplace I've got to be. And Ron kept on walking. Down by the schoolyard, Ron saw his friend Carl shooting baskets. All right, you made it, called Carl. Hi, Carl, said Ron. I wish I could stay, but I've got something important to do. More important than basketball on a summer vacation, said Carl. Are you kidding? Ron laughed. He loved to play basketball, but not today. Today was too important. Ron kept on walking. When Ron got to the Lake City Public Library, he stopped. This was it. He was hot from walking so fast, and he was nervous too. He took a deep breath, lifted his head high, and went inside. Mrs. Scott was busy getting ready for all the people who would be using the library today. As the head librarian, she had to make sure that everything was neat and orderly. Mrs. Scott looked up to welcome her first visitor of the day. She smiled as Ron walked in. He was her best customer. Ron gave a little wave to Mrs. Scott and went right to the shelves. It took Ron a while to find some books. He always looked for books that showed children who looked like him. But that was hard. There were not many books about black kids on the shelves. At last, Ron found some books on airplanes. He took the books and started to walk to the front desk. Ron felt nervous and his hands felt a little sweaty, but he knew what he had to do. Mrs. Fielding, a white lady who was often in the library, stopped him. You can give me the books and I'll check them out for you, Ron, she said gently. No thanks, Mrs. Fielding, Ron said. I'm going to do it all by myself. But Ron, she started to say. Ron was already on his way to the front desk. He put the books on the counter. I'd like to check these out, please, said Ron. The desk clerk didn't look at him. Didn't she hear me? Ron wondered. Ron knew what he had to do. He jumped up on the counter. He wanted the desk clerk to know he was serious. "I'd like to check out these books," he said quietly. At first, the desk clerk and Mrs. Scott just looked at each other. "You know you can't check out books, Ron," said Mrs. Scott. "You can read them here. That's the rule. Only white people can check out books from the library." Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk politely, but he would not budge. "I always read them here. Today I want to check them out," said Ron. Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk did not know what to do. Ron wouldn't get off the counter. People were staring. Finally, the desk clerk called the Lake City Police. Two policemen came right over. "Let someone check out the books for you, son," said one of the policemen. "You know the rules." But Ron just shook his head. He would not budge. Now Mrs. Scott called Ron's mother. Mrs. McNair came to the library very quickly. "I know how you feel, baby," she said, "but you have to follow the rules." "I can't," Mama told her. "It's wrong." Ron told her, "It's wrong. The rules are not fair. Why can't I check out books like everyone else?" No one said anything. Not the desk clerk, not Mrs. Scott, not the policeman, not even Ron's mother. Mrs. Scott looked at Ron. She thought about all the times that Ron came into the library and all the times he sat at tables for hours looking over so many books. He was her best customer, and she knew what she had to do. Mrs. Scott walked back into her office and started writing. Ron wondered, what was she doing? Mrs. Scott returned and handed Ron a library card. His library card. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and smiled. As he jumped to the floor, he thought he saw her smile too. "I'd like to check out these books, please," he said, handing the card to the desk clerk. The desk clerk took his library card and stamped the cards in the back of the books. "These are due back in 2 weeks," she said. Ron smiled. "Thank you," he said. He tucked the books under his arm and took his mother's hand. Together they walked home. Ron couldn't wait to get to his room. And open to page 1. The boy, who was Ron McNair, grew into a man who flew planes just like he dreamed he would do. He became an astronaut. Today, everyone in Lake City remembers him. They remember him every time they walk into the library. The red brick building on 234 Main Street is a special place. The walls in the children's room were painted with pictures that show children reading books under a huge oak tree. A space shuttle flies through the sky. Inside the library, anyone can get a card and check out books. Young Ron McNair had a dream. On that day in 1959, he made it start to come true. Because of him, many young people have a chance to dream. You can only be a winner if you are willing to walk over the edge. Astronaut McNair once told a group of children, "You're eagles. Spread your wings and fly to the sky." Many years ago in Lake City, South Carolina, young Ron McNair became a hero. Years later, in 1986, astronaut Ron McNair was once again a hero. He lost his life when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on January 28th, with the loss of the entire crew. The Lake City Public Library is dedicated to astronaut McNair. This story is a fictionalized account of a real incident in Ron McNair's life. There are several versions of this story, but this version comes from interviews with Ron's mother, the late Mrs. McNair, and Gloria Wilson, administrative assistant to the Director of Library Systems in Florence County, South Carolina, and Gloria Tisdale of the Lake City School District. We thank them for their help in reconstructing this inspirational story. Except for Mrs. McNair and Ron, all of the character names are fictional. So boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this story, and this is the actual Ron McNair, who the story is actually about. He became an astronaut and was able to fly like he dreamed when he was a little boy. You too can become an astronaut or whatever you want to be when you grow up, boys and girls. Just stick to your dreams, be smart, stay in school, and do what your parents tell you to do. Once again, this is the front page of this book, Ron's Big Mission. I hope you've enjoyed this story, boys and girls, and please continue to read every day. Until next time with Storytime with Mrs. D, have an awesome night.